developing meaningful relationships with people in a, Zoom or Google Meet environment is not easy. We're going to come out the other side with some new skills that could be really valuable.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Built by Humans. Today, we have Toby Gabriner, the Chief Executive Officer at Bitly. If you have clicked a link on the internet, you have probably used Bitly, whether you know it or not. Bitly is one of those OG New York tech companies that has just been around forever, built an excellent business. And today we get to talk to the new CEO. And so Toby, super experienced operator, previously the CEO of Nextroll, has been doing the tech leadership thing for a long time. And this was a cool episode. One of the things that the past year has really done has made us all kind of stop and look at what we're doing and evaluate, hey, is this actually working? Does this actually make the most sense? And what we talked about with Toby is applying that evaluation and rethinking to how businesses operate. And so this has been something that Toby's been passionate about for a long time. I think we're in the midst of a metamorphosis for many companies and just how business is done. And Toby shares his thoughts as a new CEO that took over the business in the middle of a pandemic. And so I love this episode.
Yeah, and this kind of reminds me of one of our previous episodes, Scott, Edon Gottlieb, where he's talking about how crises really expose your strengths and weaknesses and cause you to reflect more strongly. I think it's really cool to hear how Toby's thinking about it, how he's looking for new ways to give his employees more power, more autonomy across the organization. And I'm just really excited to see how that plays out as the company continues to grow and coalesce around his new vision.
Yeah, absolutely. Power to the people. That's the future. That's how great leaders are thinking. And so without further ado, let's hear from Toby. Toby, what's going on, man?
Hey, Scott. Great to connect with you.
It's great to have you on the show. God knows I have shared a zillion Bitly links over the years, and now we get to talk to the new CEO, or almost been a year, but excited to have you on the show. And I want to kick this off with an icebreaker. Toby, what did you want to be when you grew up?
My original intent was that I wanted to be a politician, and even more specifically, having been born and bred in San Francisco, I had the dream of being the mayor of San Francisco someday.
Wow. I think there's a lot of people that maybe wish you were the mayor of San Francisco.
I can tell you, Scott, there are many jobs I would like to do. That is not one of them. But hey, I was passionate about my city, and at the time, in my naive youth, I thought that would be a pretty cool gig.
I'm sure there's more ways in the private sector that you might be able to impact the general well-being of that city. And I know that you guys are actually doing it. So it's all good. But I think we were talking a little bit about that I think is interesting is, COVID has really been a catalyst for us to rethink everything. It's been an opportunity to interrupt the pattern of what are we doing? Is it working? Where are there opportunities for us to improve? Is this whole program that I've been running for XYZ years because what you always were told that how things are supposed to be, is it actually the best? Is it actually optimal for the scenario and the outcomes that we're trying to drive for? And I know you've been on kind of a personal odyssey of exploring this in relation to how companies are run. And I'd really, you called it the company operating system. I'd love to just learn more about how you've been thinking about that.
Yeah. I think your call out about how COVID is really, been a forcing function for companies to take a step back and rethink everything. Obviously, the biggest one is, for those of us in the digital sector, we were fortunate that we could move to a fully remote and still be productive and, dare I say, for a lot of companies, very viable. But it had the impact of not only changing the way in which that we work and interface with each other, because now everything is in a fully two-dimensional environment. But I think it sort of called into question, a lot of the norms about how we operate, from meetings to decision making, et cetera, et cetera. And as you said, it's been a journey that I've been on for a while and thinking about, and the combination of both jumping into a new company in the middle of COVID, Bitly, and sort of a company that was in at a time when it was really needing a bit of a reset, as well as COVID being a forcing function has allowed me to accelerate some of the areas that I've been thinking about. And one of them is, as you said, is this notion of rethinking the company operating system. And what I mean by that is that if you think about all the elements that make up how a company operates on a day-to-day basis. So from org structures to process to policy to decision making to meetings, sort of all of the elements that we sort of just have been, and from inertia sort of just accepted that this is the way things are supposed to go. And part of it is growing up, I suppose, in San Francisco, and kind of having a different view on things. It's that's always been embedded in me of like, why do we have to always go down the path of the tried and true and what everybody thinks we're supposed to do? So I've been spent a lot of time thinking about that, and I've always been attracted to philosophies and new ways of thinking about how to operate. And I got particularly, I would say, more motivated and really started trying to do some real implementation at my last company, Nextroll, after I read a book called Brave New Work by a gentleman by the name of Aaron Dignan, who really, I think, encapsulates a lot of the way I've been thinking about things for a long time. Both philosophically, but then he has a consultancy where he actually works with companies, large and small, about how to start implementing, at first they can be small, new ways of operating. And we started down that path at Nextroll, and I think it was we could see that it was going to have a real impact on the company. And when I got to Bitly, it was something that I just continued on. And we're just doing a lot of work around. A lot of it is about how do you just empower folks at the edges and give people room to make decisions on their own without it being like this sort of big bureaucratic environment. And the last thing I'll say on it, a corollary to it, is sort of like the whole agile movement that happened in software. And I always felt like why does that have to only live in an engineering environment? Like, why can't we bring the agile methodology and mindset to the way an entire company operates? And so that might be a way in which the folks can get their head around what we mean by sort of rethinking the operating system.
I guess a couple questions I have. The first is Toby, where do you think the biggest opportunity for disruption is in kind of the traditional operating system?
I would say, look, let me just start by saying that that this is not something that you can overnight start to implement. These are you take steps and you are looking for progress, but it takes many years to really transform companies where you start to sort of really notice it across an entire organization, particularly larger organizations. It's easier for smaller organizations. I guess the short answer to your question, though, Scott, would be is that it starts with decision making. And most companies and the way companies were set up, the orientation was around top-down decision making, and that's why we have again the same kind of org structure that was invented 150 years ago still exists today, because the notion is that as you move up the ranks and all the way up into the CEO position, that, those are the people that ultimately need to make all the decisions for the company. And I think there's a notion that you can start to turn that on its head, where you create frameworks that really do allow folks at all levels to make decisions. And I think there's a couple parts that are important in that. One is that you need to create some sort of guardrail or agreement about what is an acceptable range of decision making that can happen on a particular topic, right? So it's not just a total free for all, and or people don't have some sense of sort of like how they should be thinking about where decision making starts and stops on certain kinds of topics. And those can be in the form of like literally written agreements that are put into a shared repository, and everybody is clear on that. So I think that's one important. The other, I think, and you're starting to hear about this more, is this notion of one-way versus two-way door decisions, right? So one-way door decisions you could think of them as virtually irreversible, right? You make a massive decision, and it could take years to unwind that, right? That's one that probably needs to be scrutinized and have potentially, but not always, somebody from a senior leadership who's involved in that. But the lion's share, I would posit, 90+% of decisions that are made day in or day out are two-way decisions, right? Meaning that they are reversible. And those are the ones that I think it's increasingly critical and a big opportunity for disruption for companies to move at a much faster pace to let folks across the organization make those decisions. And you get two things out of that. You get speed, and you get a lot more learning that happens ultimately, because as people make decisions and make mistakes, they learn. And what you ultimately get is a fast-moving, smarter organization. If you were to ask me sort of like, where am I leaning into the most? It is in terms of thinking about disrupting the traditional ways of operating. It's that particular area. This is the area that at Bitly we are on our journey and starting to spend some more and more time on. It's just like, how can we be faster moving, more people positive, and letting folks make decisions throughout the organization.
Yeah, I think for me, this comes down, how do company goals get set? Because I can imagine like, here's the goal, and now you guys got to figure out how to hit that goal. And that's how we're going to basically keep you accountable to just doing whatever you want to do within a framework. And so like where does autonomy start and end? And are goals a part of that autonomy?
Let me start with saying it's really important to start really small but measurable and impactful, and you start to prove this model out, right? This is not something where you immediately say, okay, we're going to let the entire organization have free reign over how they're going to manage spending and budgeting. Like, right? That's not something you would start with. It may be that there is a particular product area or customer that you want to go after, or even things within like letting the employee base decide how PTO should be managed, something like that, right? It's just like, but it needs to be done in steps. You can't just overnight say, okay, we're going to push all of our company-wide goals out. That wouldn't be the first place I would start. So, in time, what you would hope is that you can widen the aperture out to more and more of the kind of big decision areas. And none of this, Scott, means that there's not a group, and it can be leaders, but it could be beyond leaders that are setting the strategic direction for the company and things of that nature, and what the ultimate goal should be, right? But I think increasingly you could say, look, we have a strategic direction and an annual set of financial goals. And then you let folks work their way back on what the quarterly goals, right? That could be, kind of answering your question directly, rather than senior leadership set the, 2 or 3 year plan, set the annual plan, set the quarterly plan, And then the employee basis is like, okay, well, now we know exactly what we're supposed to do. And within every single quarter of every single month, right? Like that's where things can start to evolve. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think this, what I'm getting is it doesn't have to be this immense polarity, right? Like there can be a middle ground. You can gradually do this as culturally people start to adopt more of these rhythms. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And frankly, the good news is that I think more and more companies are doing this.
I think there's a general, understand. And by the way, it's sort of like a push-pull. I think leaders are increasingly figuring out that this is a good way to operate. But I also think there's an increased expectation that, sort of modern day employees, if you will, are starting to demand. And that's what I mean by the push-pull is that this is becoming an expectation now.
I'm interested to hear about like your process. And so, you take a kind of common assumption like this is what like businesses should have a hierarchy as an example. What's your process for like exploration for these different kind of rethinking elements? Do you have a way that you go about it?
Well, let's take one that actually we're starting to explore a bit, which is meetings, right? Which is I'm sure this is true for you and all your listeners. That I've never been at a company where people have not overwhelmingly complained about the number of meetings, the substance of meetings, et cetera, et cetera. And yet it exists at every single company. Like I can't think of a single place that I've been where I know anybody who's like, we do meetings really well. That just is. So we now, as what we call our extended leadership teams. So that's been something else that we've really done is just to think about like the senior leaders are not really the ones that are going to be the driving force within the company. It really is the extended leadership. So we have this extended leadership group, and we are getting ready to embark on a journey where we are thinking about different areas of the company that we can start to rethink how we operate. And I think meetings is going to emerge as one of them. So what will happen in that exercise, you'll have a group who volunteers who basically says, we want to take on thinking about how we can rethink meetings. And what they will then do is put together a proposal amongst, first they'll go through a process amongst themselves to sort of identify what that proposal should be, but then they'll bring it back to the wider extended leadership team. And that proposal will then go through sort of a couple of different steps of Q&A and discussion, eventually leading to, is this safe to try? And if you get around the table, it's safe to try, then we will take it out and we will go and implement that. And it essentially acts, it has, time bound and it's an experiment. And, it may be that we decide every quarter, I'm making this up, that everybody's calendar is blown up and every standing meeting, every meeting is taken off the calendar. And we sort of do a rebuild of meetings, and with an eye towards like hopefully that would whittle down and start to really identify that there are a lot of frivolous meetings that aren't actually needed ultimately. So that would be an example, Scott, of how an operation might take a working norm and come up with a new construct and see if they can work it through. And by the way, after the experiment period, it may be decided, that we were wrong. The meetings are fine. Who knows how that plays out. But that's the idea of that you're on that journey ultimately, and you're, kind of iterating and learning and implementing when it works.
I love that. And that resonates so much. I mean, honestly, I'm very much in we meet way too much for things that could just be processed asynchronously and commented on, and then we could actually discuss the contention points versus the just verbal status updates. And it's funny, we had a meeting internally that I pushed to do the kind of experiment thing, and I got a lot of pushback on it. And how can we not have this meeting? It's the most important part of the business, even though the meeting was basically a regurgitation of a report that anybody could read in 3 minutes. I guess as a kind of habit stance, we didn't have it for a few weeks, and we started to do these written updates, and now everybody likes it better. And it's so funny. And I think the thing that was missing that you so elegantly just conveyed is really a process to get people excited and open to that change in almost like a container, right? Versus like a whole stop change. Like, hey, let's have this experimentation period. Do we believe that this is safe to try? I think that's a great frame to position this as an internal marketer of an idea that, frankly, that's a lot of times that's a big part of the job of being a leader in a business.
Yeah, I think that construct is also helpful for people who are on the fence to think about it less binary of do I absolutely hate this versus, okay, we're not saying we are going to do this. We're saying we are going to try something. And it forces people to think about, is the business going to, fall apart? Am I going to be unable to do my job? Right. You sort of start to force people to look within. And more often than not, in my experience, when doing this exercise is that people are like, you know what, at the end of the day, I don't love this, but it is safe to try. Like nothing catastrophic is going to happen. And then to your point, and that's a great story, Scott, it's just like, if the outcome ends up being a positive one, it ends up where people, I think, then are even more open to potential change and doing things. By the way, if it's a negative, I think they also feel pretty good because they feel like, hey, this is a place where we can actually try things and we learn and we actually take the learning and we execute on that. And in the case that you described, it sounds like you're going to move forward with that framework, but maybe it didn't work. And then you went back to having the meeting, and the people who felt disenfranchised by that actually feel like they're more open now to trying things because they believe that if it doesn't work, that you'll go back to doing things the way that they saw it working ultimately. So that's why I really love that construct, because I think either way, it sort of lands in a good place.
How do you encourage a culture of people sharing their work and results? Here's what I've seen. Like everything you're describing is awesome in concept because you do move faster, you get more done, you learn faster. But a lot of times I find that where this can be problematic is when people aren't sharing the learnings. And also you're moving fast, but people don't know what other people are doing. And so it's kind of like there isn't a collective intelligence that's being created or disseminated. And people are kind of like, what the hell is everybody else doing? And so like that to me is another kind of linchpin for this concept to work. And I would just be interested in terms of like how you've been able to do that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Scott, you're spot on, and that transparency is a crucial part of this, and is the underpinnings for something like this to work. And it actually starts with that, I would say, which is that everybody has to have a shared understanding of what's happening throughout the company. And it's not only just what's happening in terms of the financial metrics, but the people metrics, the customer success metric, sort of all of that. And that culture is crucial to be able to execute on any of the ideas that we were just talking about. So I couldn't agree with you more. That is actually one that I think does need to come from the top down as a starting point, which is like, we are going to create an environment, and I have tried to do this at all my stops of being very open and transparent about what's happening in the business, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? I mean, that's part of it. in lots of different functions, right? And I think as people start to realize that the CEO and then other leaders are being extremely open and transparent, you're sort of setting that foundation that this is the way we're going to ultimately operate. And I think that that goes a long way of people feeling more connected into the company ultimately. So long-winded way of saying, I think your points were spot on. That is really the starting point for all of this. And once you've got that, then you're able to start to do a lot of what I described. And by the way, everything I described, and I mentioned this in passing, but you need a shared repository where all this stuff lives, right?
Yeah.
So it can't just be, hey, we flash it up, at a company meeting and then nobody saw it again or whatever. But there needs to be a environment where people can go in and they can actually see all of these things, whether, whatever the agreements were, whatever the financials are, whatever the product roadmap is, right? That's always a big one. It's like people feel like they have no idea what's happening in product all the time. Like all those things need to be shared out. And once you do that, I think people feel like they know what's going on. It makes their decisions more sound. It makes them feel more connected in all of that. So I couldn't agree with you more.
I think a big thing that I have seen a lot of companies do, or another kind of trend, and something frankly I wish we had a much better culture of at Troops, and I would like to start to make progress on this, is a culture of documentation. And it's not even just like the results and the things that were gone, but it's like, what are the ways that we do things? Mm-hmm. Like this is how we do recruiting. This is how we do the first 30 days. This is how we structure our one-on-ones. And obviously giving people flexibility, but there's just so much institutional knowledge that is just being transferred in meetings that could all be written and revised, and frankly just the iterations giving context to the learning that today you miss out on.
Absolutely. We also just recently went on a initiative around creating a glossary because having shared language and understanding a language is super important. We actually use Guru, which has been pretty successful for us as a repository for everything that you just described there ultimately. It's a pretty simple tool, but powerful.
Yeah. So Toby, I mean, we've been talking a lot about different organizational changes, rethinking it, and the possibilities of all of that. I just wanted to get a little bit more tactical and ask you, like, today, as you look at your business 1 year in, what is the main area of improvement that you're really looking to make a big impact in by enacting some of these changes?
I mean, I hate to sound like a broken record, but it really is around the ability for us to be an agile organization where people are moving really a lot faster on their own without this sort of notion of like leadership oversight ultimately. And a big part of that was Bitly. One of the challenges Bitly had when I got there is that it had been sort of moving in a multitude of different directions. It didn't have clarity of where it was trying to ultimately go and what the couple year out set of goals and sort of like even more specifically, like who are the customers we're going after? What's the kind of offering that we want to have in market? Those sorts of things. So we did the hard work as a team to put that in place. And one of the things, I mean, granted, I'm only 9 months in, and this is not like the most amazing accomplishment, but we set a foundation of where we're trying to go in October of last year. We're in the last 2 weeks have been sort of looking at that and making sure that's still on point. Are there areas that we need to refine and things of that nature? And two things came out. One is, yes, we are, all systems go. And not only do we believe that the plan that we set 9 months ago is the right plan, but we see this continuing to drive us for, the quarters and potential years to come. And that's super cool to see that, which led to the second part, which is that, and you can feel this in the organization in which increasingly, like I can, bounce into meetings and be a much smaller and smaller voice and participant, because folks are clear and they are taking ownership and they are driving things forward. And you see it show up in company meetings and all hands and product roadmap sessions, all those sorts of things, to the point where, and this is super cool, there was a group of Bittisons, as we call our folks that work at the company, who came up. They got so inspired by the notion of really being a lot more employee-driven company that they came up with this notion of a company hack week. Hack weeks have traditionally been in the realm of the engineering organization. So about 2 weeks ago, we basically shut down the whole company for a week and did a company-wide hack week in which that the folks at the company self-organized into cross-functional teams. So we had, I think it was 8 or 10 teams, and they figured out areas that they wanted to focus on that would help to accelerate the business, whether it be on the product side, on the go-to-market side. And there was a lot of work in just sort of how we operate and ways in which we can get better. And that was all done without any leadership involvement or, kind of driving this thing ultimately. For me, that was a pretty proud moment. I'd never seen a company-wide hack week, and B, that I felt like really demonstrated what we had been trying to put in place when I first got to the company. So anyway, those are the things I think that will continue to drive us and make it successful as we move forward. And by the way, our numbers continue to go up, and sort of, which is also, I think a good testament to how we're trying to implement things.
Toby, I have one more question for you. So you came in to Bitly as the CEO in the middle of a pandemic. You're coming up on a year since that. I mean, honestly, I can't really think of a more adverse situation to do a takeover. I don't know if that's the right word, but I think you get the idea, right? What's been the biggest learning for you?
I think that what it ultimately was, it was a test of my ability to adjust to new ways of creating connections with people, because I didn't meet anybody, and I'm definitely a people person and a connector. And I think that's A, I think it's critical in my role, and B, it's an area that I always feel like that I've been able to excel at. So developing meaningful relationships with people in a Zoom or Google Meet environment is not easy. You don't get to pick up on the cues of people. It's hard to do the kind of small talk. You can't really do like coffee walks or, things of that nature. Or, I would connect with people in hallways and in kitchens and all of that. So everything was very forced. It wasn't organic. That was incredibly challenging. And I think that it definitely is. I think I've gained some new muscle, if you will, in my ability to learn how to connect people. I don't want to continue to do that. I can't wait to go start meeting. But we have about 125 people. I've met 2 of the people in person for maybe 30 minutes. That's it so far in my tenure. So it's been a pretty unique experience in entering into a company and developing relationships. Probably 2x the time it takes to develop those relationships.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that makes a ton of sense. And I think, moving forward in kind of this brave new world, if you will, that we live in, that's a really valuable skill set. I mean, a lot of the people that we're going to probably be hiring at companies aren't going to live where we live. They're not going to be in the same city, and even the ones that are, they might want to spend half a year somewhere else. And so I think it's actually a really valuable skill set, and one that will become only more important.
Yeah, I think you're right. I also think learning how to and figuring out how to create and manage team dynamics in that environment is also a critical skill that has emerged out of this as well. Because that wasn't easy, right? It's just like, not only was it challenging to get to know somebody one-on-one, but then sort of like in a group setting, and I'm sure you experience this, is sort of the awkwardness of like the dead silence in the middle of a meeting, or, 75% of the people have themselves on mute, which obviously doesn't exist when you're all in a conference room. So that's another area of just kind of getting used to that, and learning how to navigate that was also an interesting part of the journey. But I agree, we're going to come out the other side with some new skills that could be really valuable.
I love it. Andre, maybe we go into the lightning round here.
All right, Toby, I'm going to hit you with an easy one to start. Where do you want your next vacation to be?
Hawaii, which I've already got planned. That is my happy place. I should say not just mine. My wife and my kids, we love it there.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
What is your new, you kind of spoke about this, how you had to adjust your format of communication since you weren't around. What has been your new preferred format of communication digitally for your company, and why?
Well, I don't know if I had a new one. Certainly there's been a greater emphasis on the combination of video conferencing and Slack, right? Those have been the lifeblood.
For sure. We've spoken to a couple other people on the show, and it's like some people were like, "Hey, I really got into writing up long form memos," or a lot of people have said that they love like making like Loom videos or something like that, where they're just kind of addressing the company on a weekly basis.
I wish I could say that I had like really creative ways that I did that. Unfortunately, no. But maybe I'll get a little more inspired as I go forward in hearing these ideas.
Sounds good. The last one here is 6 months from now. What do you think your biggest challenge will be?
This is probably going to sound like cliche, but I think it's really going to be for us about execution. We've got clarity of direction, and we're starting to really hire in key folks. And at that, I would say by the 6-month marker, it'll be really our ability to execute at a high level.
That's awesome. Well, Toby, this has been epic, man. It's been great. You've given a lot of food for thought to our listeners, to myself. That is for sure. And we're excited to just watch the innovation that you're driving at Bitly continue to flourish. I think you really hit the nail on the head when you talked about this, like, it not being an overnight journey. Anything hard isn't, and that's company building, that's entrepreneurship, it's change management, it's everything. And I think it's an important kind of expectation that anybody listening should have. But this stuff can be done, and with ongoing hard work and diligence, you can make the changes. And I'm really excited about some of the ways that you're thinking about things.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you both having me on the show. It was my pleasure.